This meeting is now being recorded.
Okay, so hello and welcome to the informational webinar for Go For It Cohort 3. Woohoo! We're really excited that you are with us and that we can hardly believe we're in this final cohort. And this webinar is intended to orient you to some of the basic information about the integration process, as well as what to expect when the EI state team comes to your community for your initial 2-day visit, as well as your universal training. An additional webinar is going to be provided to you to review changes to the IFSP form and how and when you'll begin using that. As I said, we're going to keep you muted today as we're recording this, so please go ahead and type your questions in the chat and we will answer them as we are able throughout today's call. So without further ado, let's go for it. So first, thank you for being a part of this initiative. It has been branded Global Outcomes for Infants and Toddlers, or Go For It, and that name was developed by the IFSP Child Outcome Summary Task Force when we began this initiative in 2015. The EI Colorado State team is excited to be able to work with your communities to find out how to best integrate these two processes and make a meaningful difference for children and families across our state. So here are the CCBs and communities in your cohort. You can see that there are 8 CCBs participating in the third and final cohort: Community Options, DDRC, Developmental Pathways, Eastern, Foothills Gateway, Horizons, Southeastern, and Strive. Let's get started with some terms. We want to encourage you to get in the habit of referring to these terms consistently so we can be certain we're all talking about the same thing, to each other, to families, to our partners in the field. The first two hopefully should be very familiar: the IFSP, or the Individualized Family Service Plan, which includes the process for looking at the strengths and needs of the child, the concerns and priorities of the family. A written plan is developed to meet those needs and address the concerns by determining IFSP outcome strategies and services. And then the COS, or the Child Outcome Summary process, looks at the child's functioning in relation to same-age peers and age-expected development. And a rating is determined based on that comparison. So the COS is really referring to the actual rating activity, which will become part of the IFSP activities as you move forward with Go For It. So I see in the chat that we have a chat that the PowerPoint is not advancing. If others could confirm that, if it's for everyone or just for one individual, it may be a computer glitch. So if other people are not seeing it advance, please let me know. Yes, we should be on the terms slide. You should see on your screen right now, terms continued, IFSP outcomes, and the 3 global outcomes. So Amy, I would suggest maybe refreshing, signing off, and signing back on. It sounds like it might be something going on with your computer. So IFSP outcomes are based on the concerns and priorities of the family that are unique to the child. And the 3 global outcomes are the 3 child outcomes that are reported to the Office of Special Education Programs, and they are the same for all children receiving early intervention services. So hopefully these are familiar to you. Children will have positive social emotional skills, including social relationships. Children will acquire and use knowledge and skills, including communication skills, and children will use appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. So the reason that we are asking that you use the term IFSP outcomes and 3 global outcomes is because we found that there was a great deal of confusion around the term outcome, and we often use them interchangeably with the term goals, which is a more Part B oriented term. And so we're really encouraging you moving forward to use the term IFSP outcomes and 3 global outcomes. And once you are comfortable with these terms and you get comfortable with the 3 global outcomes and what they are, you're going to talk to families about them in a less formal way. These are the formal terms and the formal language that we use, and they're for you to get used to and get oriented to. For families, we will use less formal language. Okay, so go for it, Cohort 3 communities, the CCBs, as well as your partners that are beginning the initial implementation phase of integrating the IFSP and the COS. The initial 2-day visit is the visit where your team lead and EI state support staff will come out to visit your community and engage in community process mapping, which we're going to talk about a bit later. And we're going to look at your current state, what you are doing currently at your CCB, and we'll talk about what your future state will look like when you integrate the 2 processes, and we'll engage in action planning, and that's going to take place between February of this year and June of 2017. Sarah, I'm glad you haven't left the meeting. I'm glad you're still here. The universal training is the 1-day training that will address how to implement an integrated process plus any needed foundational training. So the dates for this training will be scheduled between April and September of this year, and the majority of you have already committed to dates. We're really excited about that to get those going. So that's great, and we'll get those firmed up and share them with everyone. Now let's discuss what the integration of the IFSP and the COS process will look like. So currently, for non-go-for-it programs, the 3 global outcomes are generally discussed for the first time after eligibility is determined and a cost rating must be conducted. Often it's an afterthought, families aren't always involved in the process, and there is no explanation or discussion about them at intake or during evaluation. Moving forward, the global outcomes will be explained from the beginning and discussed throughout a family's time in early intervention. So that's a shift in our thinking and the way that we talk and discuss about these. So we're going to introduce the 3 global outcomes from the beginning of the early intervention process, and they are really used as a way to think about the child's functioning in everyday routines and activities, to support how IFSP outcomes are written and how they're discussed with families, and as part of the ongoing assessment of progress. So in addition to the activities mentioned previously, the IFSP and the Child Outcome Summary forms have been combined as part of the Go For It process, and they are designed to reflect the 3 global outcomes as that guiding framework that we're discussing. So as a result, the 5 developmental domains are used only for evaluation and assessment. So really, that framework won't change because that's a requirement of the multidisciplinary evaluation that we evaluate in all five developmental areas. and Child Find will continue to talk with families about that, but we're going to make a shift from just the 5 developmental domains into the global outcomes language. The rating will then be completed within that IFSP process. It's going to be completed within the form itself, so that will eliminate the need for an additional cost form. So that's exciting. One less form, one fewer form. Okay, so let's talk about some big ideas. Our current process has created confusion not only for families, but also for professionals in our field. One of the intents of this initiative is to really help align the work so we are all sharing the same information and are moving in the same direction regarding the achievement of IFSP and global outcomes. At the end of the day, our goal is that children will be successful wherever they happen to be beyond early intervention. In the past, we found that many of the IFSP outcomes were based on a skill deficit in one or more of the developmental domains rather than on the functionality of the skills within the family's routine. So with that being said, we wouldn't expect to see on a plan outcomes based on domains, such as this is the communication outcome, this is the motor outcome, this is the social emotional outcome. Moving forward, our goal is that we would see IFSP outcomes based on the child and family's routine that will not only impact the child's individual progress and help develop skills in multiple areas, but will also help support the child's progress in one or more of the global outcomes areas. So that's the big shift. That's the big idea. And in the past, that disconnect for accountability for children making progress, providers have really focused on just the IFSP outcomes instead of really marrying the two. So what we're aiming for is that the state is accountable for, programs are working toward, providers are focusing on, families understand, and children achieve the 3 global outcomes. And that we're all accountable for the same thing. At the end of the day, the overarching goal of this work is that the child and family's involvement in early intervention services will enhance the development of the child and support effective participation in daily routines that have been identified by the family. And that's really thinking about the child's functioning in each outcome area across settings and situations. And that's key. It's not just in one environment, it's wherever the child and family happen to be. So more big ideas that what matters to the family the most is discussed in relation to each of the 3 global outcomes, that we're checking in and we're cross-referencing that. And that the IFSP team, including the family, considers how to write IFSP outcomes that continue to help the child progress in each of the 3 global outcomes, support effective participation in routines identified by the family. And again, as I said earlier, when the 3 global outcomes are the organizer for where we want the child to be, the use of discrete domain-specific objectives, they really don't make sense. And so that's why it's important that we're talking with families about this throughout the whole process in early intervention. So why use the 3 global outcomes? We didn't just sit around at the state thinking of oh, wouldn't this be fun and nice for the CCBs to do. This is really a national initiative, and they were developed based on what families have identified as important for their children, and they align with functional IFSP outcomes. And that is really key, we believe, to quality outcomes. And they really do emphasize a focus on the whole child, not just thinking about a child in terms of quote-unquote developmental parts. We're thinking of the child in a holistic way. They're flexible, they're not tied to one assessment, curriculum, or level of child functioning. They're applicable for all children that we serve. So you may be asking how this work ties into the overall goal to increase quality across the state. The IFSP cost integration process, or Go For It, is a key component of EI Colorado's efforts to increase quality practices and provide consistency as part of our state systemic improvement plan. And this work directly informs that SIP. And so you can see on the bottom here, as part of our key components, that child outcomes integrated into the IFSP process contributes to IFSPs with meaningful functional outcomes. Families are more engaged. As a result, children practice skills and achieve their outcomes. And this relates directly to global outcome 3C, children use appropriate behaviors to get their needs met. This isn't a standalone component, however. You will see that family assessment conducted to fidelity and the creation of a new data system, the unicorn that we're all familiar with, work hand in hand with the success of this initiative. So these three components are key. So now we're going to talk about a model that is supporting this work and that we've had a lot of involvement in thinking about how to roll this out statewide, and we've really utilized implementation science to undertake this work. And implementation science is the study of factors that influence the full and effective use of innovations in practice. So the goal is not to answer factual questions about what is, but rather to determine what is required. So what do we need in order to be successful in implementing our work? So implementing the integration of the IFSP and the cost. So in implementation science, implementation factors are identified or developed and demonstrated in practice to influence the full and effective use of innovations. So this is a way to support our work and the development of an infrastructure that supports scale up and sustainability of effective practices. And that's why we've done it in this tiered rollout. So hence the need for 3 cohorts. We didn't roll it all out at once. We practiced. We had the Brave Souls that started in 2015. We adjusted our practices and changed some things for 2016. And now Lucky Cohort 3 is the recipient of all that good work, and hopefully it'll be a much smoother implementation process for you because we've had a lot of feedback. That being said, you're going to continue to inform and help us refine our practice as we move forward with your communities, because all communities are unique and have different needs. So in order to successfully implement and sustain evidence-based and evidence-informed interventions, we're really looking at the what. So what is the intervention that we need to incorporate? The how are we going to do this? The who needs to be involved, the where, and what foundational supports are required. These are the principles that we will be using to integrate the IFSP cost during the stages of implementation. So here's a graphic that just shows you a visual of the 4 stages of implementation science. So you can see exploration, installation, initial implementation, and then full implementation. And this represents one of the core components of implementation science, which also include implementation drivers, and we're going to talk about those here in a minute. And this really talks about teaming and improvement cycles. And many of us use these principles already, but we haven't formally identified them as such. And generally, following all the stages laid out here can take anywhere between 2 and 4 years as one travels between the stages, because they're not linear. So you may start with some exploration activities and installation and realize that you need to go back and explore other options that might work better for your community. And an example, but another piece to this is that not everything has to follow this 2 to 4 year cycle. We also have rapid improvement cycles where we would do a plan, do, study, act cycle, where you would do some trial and error or trial and learning approaches to carry out these innovations in practice. And we did this with the family assessment activities. We didn't take multiple years to roll out our family assessment practices. So this is just a quick visual of the implementation drivers, and I'm not going to go in depth with this because it's a little bit complicated for an hour call, but you can see that they're kind of the engines of change. So as with the stages, drivers they're fluid and they interact in ways to produce, innovations and reliable outcomes for implementers. So they're competency, organization, and leadership support. So, do you have the right people in place? Do you have the organizational structure that you need to make the changes? Do you have the leadership support? So all of these pieces are critical in making change and thinking about new ways of working. So if you're interested in this, at the end of the PowerPoint, there is a resource that goes in more depth with implementation science. But have faith that we are going through these stages and thinking about this as a way to drive our work. So this is an overview of Colorado's stages of implementation. We, at the state level, began exploration of this work in 2014, looking at, do we want to do this work? What would it look like? How do we go about it? We began initial installation in February of 2015 and concluded with our first cohort in July of 2015. So steps to initiate that process was really part of the Go For It task force, and these pieces at the state level have been completed, but now you're going to be engaging in these same steps. So there's the state level work, and then there's stages of implementation at the local level. So we've already asked you to secure leadership support, right? You've identified, hopefully by now, a Go For It team lead. We're going to support you in developing a communication plan and materials so people in your community know what you're doing and why you're doing this. You're going to build an implementation team to help with the work, because this is going to take more than just one person. You're going to determine needed system support. So we're giving you some of that in terms of some financial incentive to carry this out, but there are other things that you need to think about. Do you have the technology in place? Do you have enough service coordinators? Do you have a way to conduct training with new providers that come on board? So just thinking about your infrastructure. And then building training and technical assistance capacity. So you'll have support from the state over the next, about year and a half. But what happens after that? Who will take on training and TA in your community? and really thinking about your implementation plan or your action plan, and then moving on to initial implementation. So all these steps and stages you're going to undertake as well. And we're going to share with you materials that have already been developed, so do not panic. A lot of things have been done for you already. Okay, so we talked about initial implementation, and I want to talk a little bit about full implementation, where really by June 30th of 2018, we've shifted from the select group of early implementers to everyone throughout the state using the new integrated IFSP and outcomes measurement process, and that this will be carried out with every family that enters early intervention. That being said, full implementation doesn't mean that we're finished. It means that we're going to continue to refine our practices and identify areas that need further support for sustainability. So we talked a little bit about implementation teams, and your orientation letter also talked about that. So every implementation community, or the CCBs on this call, need to create an implementation team, and we suggest that your participants include a family member, at least one family member whenever possible, service coordinators, providers, representation from your child find communities, perhaps your data manager if you have one, and folks in administration. Maybe you have an intake coordinator, and that you have a team lead who's really that liaison between your implementation team, your dedicated EI state team lead, and is really kind of the driver and the planner behind the work and the liaison. And I believe most everyone has identified a team lead. So in thinking about your implementation team, you really want to think about who needs to be a part of that and invite them. And then as soon as you can, get a meeting on the books to orient them to the Go For It work, what we're talking about, and determine a regular meeting schedule, how long you're going to meet, where you're going to meet, to work through some of these things. And one of the big things that you're going to do initially is that community mapping, really putting on the paper what your current process looks like. And that's going to be best accomplished in a team. And we recommend that you think about meeting monthly, and we've gotten a lot of feedback that has been helpful for the two previous cohorts.
As you start looking at the materials that the state has developed and other communities have developed that are on the Padlet, you're going to identify some things that you feel will be helpful in orienting and educating the other implementation team members, because we recognize that you're not going to be able to explain everything based on this one webinar today, but there's lots of other additional materials that will be available to you.
Thank you, Laura. And also the other piece that you want to inform your implementation team members about is the monthly community of practice calls that will be starting on April 20th. And anyone who is on your implementation team is welcome to participate in those meetings. That will be another way to gain a greater understanding and more information. So let's look at the overview. This is a kind of big picture of the Go For It timeline. And you can see it's pretty small. We'll also send out this PowerPoint so you will have it and you can print it out and look at it more carefully. But you can see we're here in January of 2017, and we're starting our Cohort 3 activities with determining your lead, You're going to be sharing your Go For It talking points within your community, and you're going to complete the IFSP cost tool that was sent to you, and that is due back to Lenita by January 31st. And that's just to get a baseline of where your community already is in practices with your IFSP and your global outcomes. And then you can see down in 2018 where we're headed with full implementation. So down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see steps that all of you will be completing. And that first piece is the community mapping. And you really want to get working on that 1 to 2 months prior to your 2-day visit. So for some of you, that's like right away that you want to be working on that. For others of you, your visit might not be scheduled until April. Then we would expect you to start working on that next month. And then everyone will be participating in the initial 2-day visit and the action planning. And day 1 of that is really going to be kind of the core CCB team. So whoever the team lead is, some of your key leadership piece, implementation team members, and other key players. That's more internal CCB folks. Day 2 is going to be those folks in addition to your external stakeholders. So the child find rep, maybe you have somebody as part of your early childhood council, and others in your community that you want a broader representation from for day 2.
We found that for the teams that have had parent representation, they've been really instrumental actually in every step, both kind of giving a perspective from the family viewpoint of how the current process is looking, and then giving their perspective about what will truly work when we're thinking about the future, the best for families.
And then there's your universal training. That will be a day-long training. And that's usually you'll have a month between your 2-day visit and the universal training, and a lot of those are already on the books and scheduled. And then implementation will occur based on your timeline that your community determines after you participated in the universal training. So you're not going to, start today. You're not going to use anything new until after you've participated in the universal training and you have a plan for how you want to roll out. And we're going to talk about how you can do rollout of the Go For It process here in a minute. Okay, so here is the 2-day visit timeline for 2017. So you can see that our visits are scheduled. Developmental Pathways and Foothills Gateway will have their 2-day visit in February. DDRC will have theirs in March. Eastern will have theirs in April. Southeastern and Community Options will have their 2-day visit in May. And Strive and Horizons will have theirs in June. So 2 things to keep in mind. 2 is the key word here. 2-day visit. 2 months prior to your 2-day visit, you want to start planning for your weekly calls with your EI team lead. And 2 weeks before your 2-day visit, you're going to want to submit your community mapping chart to your EI state team lead. And that's really so that we can review it and plan for our visit to support you and make sure that we're addressing everything that needs to be addressed. And we will flesh out that plan more when we come for that 2-day visit, and we will walk through all of the parts of your process. The other thing that you're going to want to have available for that 2-day visit is some completed IFSPs and some completed cost ratings so that we can get a sense of, again, baseline and where your community is at right now. And some team leads think strategically about those IFSPs that they share with us. Some share their best, some share some that need some work or a combination thereof. And so we're letting you drive that, and we're not there to monitor. We're there to really support the work moving forward. So what will community mapping look like? You've been provided with the template that really outlines current overall processes statewide, so you can kind of get a sense of what we're asking you for. And then you're going to build on that to identify your community-specific current practices and document those. And you're not required to use the template we provided for you. You can use whatever makes sense for you. However, we found that that's a good way for us to travel together as a group through that work. You're also going to want to do a community map for each community in your CCB that has a different process. And I know for some of you, that is many different relationships with districts or BOCES, and so you can think about what is the same and what is different and how you can document that so you can communicate that to us. When we come out for our 2-day visit, it may make sense to chart that on chart paper per BOCES or district, however makes sense for your area. But we'll really facilitate that. And then we'll develop future steps for how you want to think about integration. But really having all of the key players present for your community mapping is really important, because if I'm trying to map out what the process looks like for my CCB and my community partners aren't there, they may have a really different view of what things look like. And so when Laura asks you, well, gosh, how long does a multidisciplinary assessment take at Happy-Go-Lucky School District? The CCB might say, oh, it takes 2 hours, and the school district might say, you know what, we're doing those in an hour. And so really making sure that you have consensus about what your process looks like. Okay, so this is the universal training timeline, and this is the 1-day training that we were talking about. And we'll send out those dates as soon as they're confirmed. We're very close to having those confirmed. I know that that was a question in the chat, and we definitely expect the broader community to be a part of that. So service coordinators, in-house providers, contract providers, child find, intake, admin, and for those that can't be present, a plan for making sure they get the information. So developmental pathways and Foothills Gateway are scheduled to have their universal training in April. DDRCs is scheduled for May. Eastern will be in June. Southeastern and Community Options will be in July. Strive will be in August. And Horizons will be in September. And so again, the implementation will not be until after you've had your universal training, and you drive that. Your community drives that. That is not driven by the state. So I want everyone on the call to take a deep breath and realize that your team has, within reason, of course, by June 30th, 2018, we've got to have this done, but you have flexibility in what that looks like and how that rolls out.
Thanks, Lenita. I just want to talk a little bit more about the universal training. I think most everyone has been contacted by their state team lead to try and get those dates nailed down. There are a few people, I think, that we still have some outstanding contact to make with. But I want to build on what Lenita just said, and that is the universal training in particular. A way to think about who needs to be there is, who do you need to know about this new process in your community? Who is involved in the IFSP process? So as you can see, that could be a fairly large group for some communities. Your EI team lead will work with you in anything you need to finalize dates, to help with the community, talk about what you're doing with community mapping, any of the preparation activities. We want to encourage you to have as many people from your community present for this training as possible so that your community understands how the new process and form will work in action. You're going to have a lot of catch-up to provide if people are not able to attend. We realize many Childline folks aren't around in the summer, but this really can't be avoided. We've got to keep our timelines moving, and we need to try and travel when the weather is cooperative, which, of course, in Colorado is up for debate, because we're not quite sure when the weather will be good. So let's talk a little bit about what training and technical assistance are going to look like. You can see we talked a little bit about the community mapping, the universal training. We also haven't talked yet about community-specific training. So if you run into something and you're like, wow, this is really a need for our community, this will be identified throughout this process as well. We'll have ongoing training and TA webinars. You'll receive individual support from your EI team lead, and that doesn't just have to be weekly. You can contact them at any time. There'll be monthly community of practice calls. Some of those will be just your Cohort 3. Some will be shared with Cohort 2 so that you can learn from their experience as well. And then we've talked about the Padlet, which is an online bulletin board. That's a constantly evolving resource for you where we will post things that you might want to need. We are really stressing the importance of as many of your folks being present for our visits as possible. And it's really important to remember it's not just the form. I think people are thinking, okay, yeah, give us the new form. All right, we'll do it. But it's really about the process, and Lenita has talked a lot about that in the beginning. We are thinking about the changing processes within the community and adjustments that need to be made and supports needed in order for this to be aligned and successful for everyone in the community. As training is developed, trainings that are applicable for all, such as the training on the integrated IFSP form, or training in TA that is community specific, we're going to be looking for feedback from your communities to continue to refine what we're providing as far as training in TA when we move forward with statewide implementation of the process. So we're really, really counting on learning from you. Well, we just said it wasn't just the form, and that is true. But the form can support the process. We've designed it to support the process. The form's going to help you better align your process with family assessment, the true concerns and priorities of the parent, processes for information gathering and communication planning, and delineation of who does what to support and implement this IFSP. The form is really intended to contribute to better understanding of all of these things. The role of the service coordinator, the role of the provider to carry out the strategies, to support the family in carrying out the strategies, how all of this is related to the 3 global outcomes, and the relationship between the skills of the child, the 3 global outcomes, and the child outcome summary rating. The word we used in this slide of telling the story is quite deliberate, because a good IFSP, when you look at it, it really is almost like a mini novel. You learn a lot about the child and family and get a good picture of what their daily life looks like. So why are we spending so darn much time talking about the process, right? We're just going to get to the end. Well, the process is really the big deal. We're stressing the importance of everyone being aware of the Go Forward initiative, being present, and participating. It really is important to understand the why behind this integrated process, not just the how. Once you really understand that, filling out the form is what we're hearing from our previous cohorts. It's not a big deal. It's really working well, is the feedback we're getting from our prior cohorts. So let's talk a little bit about community mapping. So what the heck is community mapping? What are we talking about? It's where you're really going to look at that state template that Lanita has sent to all of you and think about how your community is individualized. What do you do differently or the same as that template currently? What do your current process looks like? The reason we do this is a lot like a family assessment in an IFSP. We want to highlight the strengths of your community, identify opportunities for change that may need support in order for the integration to be successful, and you can really individualize it. As Lanita said earlier, you don't need to use that template. You can use something different. Your EI team lead can help with any questions around this process, and we want you to do it in a way that makes sense for your community. The community map, which is Chart 1 that's already been sent to you, needs to be sent to your EI state team lead. You all know who that is, 2 weeks prior to your on-site 2-day visit. It's just for our information. We really do try and individualize our visits to your needs and your community, so it's helpful for us to have a picture of what that looks like before we come out. The EI state team lead will take any kind of information you send to us, and that's going to help us engage in action planning and really further flesh that out when we come out on on the 2-day visit. This is an opportunity for us to really sit down together and brainstorm an action plan.
We've received a lot of feedback that initially that felt kind of intimidating and overwhelming, but once the communities went through the process, we received overwhelming feedback that it was very helpful, because we don't often sit and reflect on what our process is. And we might know our part in the process, but not the whole picture. And so we've gotten a lot of feedback that that's really beneficial.
Yeah, it was interesting, and we didn't even honestly anticipate that that would be so positively received, that people were really excited about having the opportunity to delve into what their current process looks like. Then once we've kind of fleshed out the current process, and during that we'll identify some considerations that you may want to look at. Ooh, are we sure we can keep doing this and really have the integrated process be successful, or is this something we might want to think about changing? So based on those, then we'll move into action planning, and that means we're going to be looking at where you want to go. What do you want this to look like when the integration is fully in place? How is it going to really increase the effective participation and learning of children and families? Remember the SIP simmer, right? The state measurable, I've forgotten. State measurable result.
Identified result.
Identified result. It's the I that always throws me. And that's that infants and toddlers who receive early intervention services in Colorado will demonstrate increased growth in the use of appropriate behaviors to get their needs met. Now, if you remember back in the beginning, when Lanita was talking about that we identified this as our simmer, and we were also talking about how you align things you know about the child with the 3 global outcomes, this is the one that really focuses on independence. So when you think about it, that's a great goal. Or a great outcome. We want all children to be moving towards being more participatory and independent in the daily life of their family. And we already talked about the 3 things that are going to work together to get there. And so we're going to think about how those work in your community so that your community can be individualized in their action planning. We're going to think about where the knowledge of the global outcomes in IFSP development is really secure, what practices need additional support, and we're going to develop an implementation plan with your implementation team. On the next slide, there's a sample action planning form that you may use. There's another one we will put up on the Padlet as well. Some of you are very familiar with action planning and have your own format that you like to use. Anything is fine. What we do want to stress here is that it is important to write these down, to actually have a written action plan that says what's going to happen, who's involved, and records the successes or the challenges that you have as you move forward.
And dates associated when those things are due.
Right. The next thing that we're going to talk about is that implementation communities need to develop a communication plan. It's really important to have communication and feedback loops. They're critical components of this work. We always think about inform, inform, inform. Don't assume that people understand things. Let's find a way of really getting the word out in a clear way in your community. We're going to support you in creating those communication plans with feedback loops and timelines so that both your community members, your implementation team, and your EI state team can respond and adjust things quickly.
So be thinking about your elevator speech. How do you explain this quickly to families, providers, and community members?
So the next slide is a little bit more about communication. Just think about how people are going to be kept updated. How are you going to be on the same page with other CCBs that share evaluation teams? This is primarily happens with communities that share BOCES, but what does it look like if you've had a neighboring community that's in one of the earlier cohorts? It's important to think about that. And then to think about routinely reaching out to stakeholders and considering what kind of technical assistance they need. So most of you have already identified your Go For It team lead. We're thinking that that team lead will probably need about 3 to 6 hours per week to work on that, especially when you're really in the thick of things. And that they're going to be the hub, the one that everything flows through, to think about communication, training, use of the IFSP form, and facilitation of the participation of your appropriate community partners. The other thing you need to think about you need to think about the location of where you're going to have those 2-day visits and universal trainings. The 2-day visit, like we said, it's very interactive. We'll be writing lots of stuff down on flowcharts and fleshing things out. The universal training is going to work through a case study in groups. So it's important that you think about, if you're going to have a large group for the universal training, where can that be hosted in a way that facilitates group interaction? So what form do you use now? You've been on the call, right? You're going to use the new form? Nope. Keep using your same IFSP form until after the training. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to move forward with using the new integrated process for everyone the day after the training. That's going to be part of your implementation team to determine how that's going to look. Are you going to roll that out with a certain school district? Are you going to roll it out with a certain geographic area? Are you going to use it for new referrals? That's all up to you. As Juanita said earlier, we want this to work in a way that's thoughtful and going to be successful for your community. All forms are available electronically and handwritten, and they're also available in Spanish. And then, of course, we have to talk about the unicorn. So where are we going to enter the cost rating that's done in this new process? Well, if the child already has an entry rating in the provider database and you're trying the new process as they transition out, then you're going to enter the exit rating in the provider database just as you always have. Now, you're still going to have the global outcomes page entered in the unicorn because that's part of the new integrated IFSP form, but you're going to need to enter that exit rating in the provider database. Once you've gone through the universal training and you begin to truly implement using the new form, which includes the global outcomes page, new referrals, any new referral that you use the new form and the new process for will be entered in the unicorn because it's not going to be anything separate anymore. It's going to be a part of the IFSP process and will be entered in the IFSP form just like all the other information that we gather with the family. So here's some options. We talked about those earlier, so I'm just going to let you look at these. It may be that you just start small. With children that have established conditions, or a selection of service coordinators and providers, or you may decide to use 3 families. We have a variety of ways our Cohort 1 and Cohort 2 communities rolled this out, and it's really up to you. So what should you be doing right now? Why do we have to do this right now, right? We have a lot of things we're doing. Well, as Juanita said, Go For It's going to roll out statewide, and this integration is really playing an integral role in helping that state meet our quality goals for children and families. So the next steps that you need to take are really to look at your orientation preparation letter that Juanita has sent out and pull together your implementation team, schedule your monthly meetings, and get your signed agreements to Juanita as soon as possible, along with your completed IFSP cost integration tool, which is due on January 31st. Begin working on your community map. I want to reiterate what Juanita said earlier. Your community map is something that is going to require teamwork because it's not something that can be done in isolation by just one person. It's pretty thorough. You want to know how are the processes working in your community throughout your entire community. We want to thank you again in advance for the work that you're going to be putting into this. We've found it an exciting process to be involved with. We've learned a lot. Our Cohort 1 and Cohort 2 communities have learned a lot, and I really feel that families have benefited from the process. All right, so let's end with any questions. I haven't seen any new ones come up in the chat. Oh, do we need to unmute folks, or do you just want to put it in the chat?
Let's go ahead and try to answer questions in the chat.
Okay.
While you're thinking about all your burning questions, we're also going to put up our contact information and some resources. So where can you find this PowerPoint? We will be posting it on the Go For It Cohort 3 Padlet to get you used to using the Padlet, and that link is on the very bottom of your screen right now. So it takes a little while once we've recorded it to get it converted and posted. So be a little bit patient, but it will be labeled Go For It Cohort 3 Orientation Webinar. So the Padlet, you don't have to be on a tablet to utilize the Padlet. So let's talk about the Padlet a little more. It is accessible from any computer. You just follow the link, and it's basically an online bulletin board. So that's how we're keeping all of the electronic information for your community. So you don't need to have a tablet. You just need to have a computer to access the PowerPoint. And, you know, if you struggle getting it, just contact us and we can send it to you. We can email it to you as well. Sorry, tablet, Padlet, they sound similar. Other questions? So the resources, as I said, there's a resource for implementation science. There's also a family guide to talking about child outcomes measurements. It's a pretty big document. You can definitely pull pieces of it and adapt it. There's the Colorado Child Outcomes Guiding Questions. And then EXTA Center has how this whole process for integrating child and family outcomes processes works, and then we have your Padlet. Other questions, other fears, anything that you're excited about? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us on the call today. Laura, Wayla, and myself are available for questions. You do have our contact information. You can see that Wayla is the primary contact for Community Options and DDRC, Laura for Eastern, Strive, and Southeastern, and myself for Developmental Pathways, Foothills, Gateway, and Horizon. Thank you all for being on the call today, and be safe out there in the weather if you're getting snowy weather right now.
Thank you, everyone. We look forward to working with you further.